Hi guys, I'm going to create a short little video for you on another take on the break-even analysis from your class this week. If you already fully understand it and you have no issues, then just ignore my little video. Don't pay any attention to it at all. Don't waste your time with it. If you're struggling with it, this is another approach to it. It is not doing it the way using the Desmos online graphing tool that your material was using. It's strictly using an Excel spreadsheet to create it. So what I have done is I took the example from your materials where you had fixed cost of $1,240, variable cost of 78 cents per unit. You were selling each of your units, widgets, whatever they are, for $1.40 each, which gives you a contribution margin of 62 cents. So given that information, let me just close this because we don't need that for right now. Then I set up this table which has columns with units sold starting from 0 and going up to like 3,000 units in increments of 50. And then a column for the fixed costs, which it doesn't matter if you have 0 units or 3,000 units, your fixed costs are just that, as discussed last night. They are fixed. So this column will always have the $1,240 in it all the way down. The variable costs were 78 cents per unit. So if you didn't sell any units, then you didn't have any variable cost. If you sold 100 units, then your variable cost would be those 100 units times 78 cents per unit, or $78. Then the total cost column is just the sum of those two, of course. So in the case of the 100 units sold, your fixed costs stay fixed at $1,240. $78 in variable cost for the 100 units times the 78 cents gives you a total cost for 100 units produced of $1,318. Your revenue then, if you sold 100 units, would be those 100 units times the $1.40 for each of those units, or $140. So your contribution margin shown here then is $62, which is just the difference in your variable cost and your revenue for those 100 units that were generated. Your overall profit, however, though, is taking into account total cost versus total revenue. So for 100 units sold, your total costs were $1,318, $1,240 in fixed and the 78 in variable. Your revenue was $140, or it's 100 units sold or produced times $1.40 each is $140. So the difference in those two means that if you only produced 100 units, you actually lost $1,178. That, of course, being a product of the high fixed cost, you have $1,240. So then this table just goes all the way down, and don't worry about this checksum column out here. That's something I build into all of my spreadsheets to full check my numbers, to put in another formula to make sure it comes back to 0, but you can just ignore that. So let's close that. Contribution margin, let's close that up. So this is what we're looking at. Number of units sold, the fixed costs, which are the same all the way down, variable costs, which is the number of units produced times the variable cost of 78 cents. Total cost is the sum of those two. Revenue is units produced and sold times $1.40 per unit, and then profit, positive or negative. So as you scroll down, you can see, of course, the more units you produce, the closer you become to profitability because you are recovering more and more of that fixed cost. Until if you come all the way down to 2,000 units sold, your fixed costs don't change. It's still $1,240. Your variable costs now, though, are $1,560, or those 2,000 units produced times the 78 cents produces the $1,560. So your total cost is $2,800, the sum of the $1,240 and the $1,560. Your revenue is 2,000 units produced at $1.40 each is also $2,800. So revenue of $2,800 minus cost of $2,800, that's your break-even point. Producing 2,000 units gives you a break even. Now, with this table then, I created a chart from that, which is shown here in this break even analysis. So you have units sold going across the bottom here, and the revenue generated for those units going up the side. And just in the chart last night, you can see this green line are units sold. This red line is the revenue that was produced. And where those two cross, it is right here at that 2,000 unit mark. So again, that just shows that the table is showing that if you produce 2,000 units, given these costs and up here, then that's where you'll break even at. So again, this area shown in here is where you are negative, you are losing money because you're not producing enough to cover your fixed cost. And then at this point you break even. So then from here and progressively going higher, you're producing more and more profit with each unit that you sell. Now, one other thing real quick, just another way of looking at this, and one thing that's cool to play with is that once you have this set up in your table and your chart, you can come along and say, well, what if I could reduce my fixed cost, and instead of it being $1,240, let's say I was able to lower my fixed cost to $1,000 a month. I negotiated a reduction in my lease or rental on my property or whatever. So if the fixed cost drops to $1,000, then you can see the immediate impact that has in the chart here, how it lowered your break-even point to something that looks like it's about 1,600 now is where the two of them cross. So instead of having to produce 2,000 units to break even, you'd only have to produce 1,600 units to break even. Everything else being equal except just reducing your fixed cost from 1,240 to 1,000. If you come back up in the table here where it has recalculated as well, and you can see it's at about 1,600. Somewhere between 1,600 and 1,650 is where it changes over at. You go from a negative $8 to a positive $23, so maybe 16.25, something like that. So let's change this back to 1240. Now, one other thing that I've done, and you can totally skip this part because this is another feature that Excel has. It's kind of a what-if analysis, or they used to call it a goal-seek function. Now they call it a solver function. But it's under the Data tab, and you go to Solver, and you say, having set all of this up with your givens again of fixed cost of 1,240, variable cost 78 cents per unit, price per unit of $1.40, number of units 2,000, my profit or loss 0. That's my break-even point. We already established that. But something you can do, let's say that you don't know that. Let's say you've got 1,000 units in here right now, and you see you're losing $620. You can go to the solver and say, sorry, it was not, I don't know why it scrolled all the way down there. Let's go back home there. So you say my objective is I want to set my profit or loss, this field, to 0, and I want to change in this equation, I want to change number of units sold. So in other words, keep doing an iterative process looking for the number of units that will produce a profit or loss of 0. In other words, a break-even point. Then you click on Solve, and it runs its little iterations. And I have a problem here. Hold on. Don't know why this thing is jumping around. All right, so I want to set this one to 0 by changing this field. And then you can see that it has done that. What it does is that it comes in and it keeps changing this number of units sold until it gets a value of 0 here. I mean, you can do the same thing if you sat here and you said, well, what if it's 1,500? No, that's not enough. What if it's 2,500? Nope, that's too much. What if it's 2,200? Nope. 2,100? Nope. 1,900. Now I went negative, so I go back to 1995. Whoops. Not quite there, so let's try 2,000. Yep, that's it. 2,000 is it. But what this solver does is it does that for you so that you don't have to keep plugging in numbers. It's kind of like if you've ever watched The Price is Right, the high-low game. They keep saying a number higher and higher, a number lower and lower till they get the right number. That's what this solver does for you, though, is that you tell it, again, I'm setting this objective. I want this field to equal 0, and I want you to make that 0 by changing this field, and then you say solve for it, and it changes that number, and it does it just that quickly because it can run through it and solve for that. Anyway, hope that helps you guys some. Hope I did not totally confuse you. If it did, just ignore everything I said. Thanks, guys.